Goodies on the side. All right, I'm gonna open up with, the, roll call, please.
When I consider jurisdiction, please state your name. San Mateo County. San Mateo County. Atherton,
Yes.
Brisbane, Pauline Malcolm, Burlingame, Dover Twister. Menlo Park. Betsy Half. Millbrae,
And that's all.
Portola Valley,
Yeah.
San Bruno.
Marty Medina.
Okay. Are there any members of the public who would like to make a comment on something that's not on the agenda? No, I believe. Maybe back there.
No public.
Okay, we have no public comment. So if we can have a motion to set the agenda and approve the consent agenda items. Thank you.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Marty Medina, by Director Medina, second by Director roll call vote. Oh, do we need a roll call vote? We have everybody here, right? Yes. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Regular agenda, chair reporting. So the main thing I have to report, Mark, here, I'm gonna feel bad talking because you got me back to you. Is, yeah, take a seat. That makes it weird. So one of the things that we've been chit-chatting a little bit about under Mark's purview and has become an initiative is sort of a way to maybe recognize and celebrate Supervisor Pine on the way out the door. And so we discussed a lot of options. And I had the opportunity to chat with him just a little bit about some of these options to find out what he might be most, interested in. It gives up the surprise a little bit, but I felt it was important to get his input. And I think where we're landing is some type of annual grant, small grant that we make for decarbonization or education. Staff's gonna work on this, but something that would be sort of the Dave Pine, grant for blah, 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 whatever. And it would sort of be a gratuity type thing. So every year it would give us an opportunity to continue to engage the supervisor as we review, say, for example, proposals for what it might be. And then it would be this sort of ongoing perpetual award that would further the mission of PCE and be really in the honoring that spirit, which I think Dave brought to this board. We also discussed the potential of like something where you award an elected official, something, recognize them for doing certain kind of work. But the sort of issue with that to me is, whenever you give an award, there's always then people who feel like, wow, why didn't I get that award? Like I did all that work too. And then you're having like award recipients and it gets a little political and feelings get hurt. And and Dave kind of agreed more of his heart is in furthering the mission and I'm doing that. So
As opposed to another
plaque. I said, I just think a lot of us have plaques and blasts and this and that. And I think Dave, keeping him engaged through the process would be a really wonderful benefit to him and keeping involved. But I would like to open it up to any other comments, suggestions, ideas, or thoughts. And Mark, if you have anything you want to.
We don't. Really interested to hear what board members have to say.
Yes,
Mr.
Medina.
Yes. Fantastic. That was thinking ahead about that, and Dave Pine was instrumental for PCE, and I think there's a special spot in heaven for him for that. Also acknowledging all of the electeds that are moving on.
Oh,
So
yes,
it goes hand in hand. I think it was appropriate to contact him to make sure he was comfortable with the decision that we were going forward with, and I support them. I think it's great that we can acknowledge the importance that his vision brought PCE to be.
I like the idea. I think he should have some input into what that grant would be, but I like the idea, and yes, you're right, it could then perpetuate for the future, it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think also, whether it's, I know Winter Rollins kind of talking the same thing, they do, annual, internships, so they're thinking about, because of his, he started in Burlingame on the Burlingame School District Board, and then he went to San Mateo Union High School District. So academia was a big issue for him and kids, so that organization might do something more like an internship or like a stipend every summer to help someone who wants to work for the organization. They're working on something like that. So I think these are all really nicely, so since they're doing more of that kind of a thing, we could do a little more of like a grant. So it could be
Do a CBO, be a nonprofit grant for a project that they would apply for. And hopefully Dave would be interested, or sorry, Supervisor Pine would be interested in participating in the selection of that award. It would occur annually, and we do have other grants for nonprofits, as you know, throughout our service territory. So this would be among them, but probably different in nature. So more to do on the details.
Yeah.
But mainly I think you want.
I just wanted to kind of
Bring it
vet
to
it
the
with
committee.
everyone at the committee level, just to see if this sounds reasonable and like something people, if people really would prefer to have more of an award for leadership, we can certainly do that. But it just feels to me like there's a lot of gratuitous words out there that are great, but they're not distinguishing, and Dave is just such a heartfelt person that I know his walls are full of beautiful awards and commemorations. I don't think he has something like this that he could participate in. Yes.
I think it's a great idea, and the other fact that it's in perpetuity, which gives him repeated recognition and as Sean said, to participate in the selection. I think that's wonderful.
Would this be awarded at the December board meeting?
We will not have the program rolled out yet for applicants to come in.
No,
So
we don't
won't
need
know
it,
But I think we.
an announcement of what it's going to be.
We have to, something, like we'll put a frame around it, a frame, not a physical frame, but a programmatic frame. And share it, of course, with Chair Colson, and we are trying to find out right now whether the supervisor will be with us in December, because he does not roll off until January. Whereas others of you, unfortunately, will be leaving us in November, so it'll either be November or
Or
December, just depending on
I see.
what Supervisor Pine is,
Okay.
when he's gonna attend.
Be available.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if that's,
I don't think we need a vote.
no vote, that's just a sort of, FYI. I also yes, please.
It might actually be nice to do it in December when all of the existing board members are here rather than January, when we have new board members who don't have that history.
And the truth is, that's November then.
Oh,
Right, because unfortunately, there's a lot
The
of
rotation.
transition meetings.
No, whatever.
So,
But I think we can still invite them to participate via Zoom or whatever, and they can come on and make some comments or send in a public comment. So we'll definitely make everyone aware of what's going on.
mainly it'll be tied to when he is planning to.
Yeah. I think it should be, but I agree with Betsy. I think if he's gonna be here in November, that's a better time.
To do it.
So we can have people here, because more people will be here for their last meeting than would show up on Zoom after they've left the board.
Cities. Teaching. The service and things, so. If it gets really hectic, we may even just roll it over to January, but, and I'm working with Linda Woolen and we'll get it all coordinated. So, yeah, I think he'll be very grateful for, and of course, I think we'll do a proclamation, like some sort of a proclamation. We'll do that as well.
There will be a physical frame.
Something for Congress, so within in that proclamation, we can recognize that we are initiating into perpetuity the day. And, you know, we could even do some sort of a perpetual plaque that goes on the wall, or every year we just write in who the recipient is, so that over years people can see who's received the award. I think it's a really nice way to recognize people. The other thing to report is I thought Sean and staff did a really nice job of summarizing the potential impacts to clean energy from the administrative change that we'll all see in January. And I just wanted to suggest to everyone, and I'll do it again at the board meeting, I shared mine out to my other council colleagues through my report out at our next council meeting. And I'm hearing from my staff and colleagues, they want to hear more about this, and I think there's a lot of questions and people are getting asked. So just a suggestion that maybe some of this good material that Sean's putting out could be passed through to colleagues so that they're aware of answer questions that constituents are giving. And I think that's really it for me.
That's your question.
What was your question?
I think we covered it.
Okay. All right, and we will, of course, be honoring and recognizing all of our long-standing board members who are in some way or another leaving us either through a reappointment or through election
Shifts.
yeah, and
We have a plan.
we have, okay, Sean,
Okay, I think next up is
CEO.
of C.
It is really nice to get that email out of the blue at a time when it was, anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, because I have to tell you, it was not easy to write.
I'm sure.
And I do want to appreciate some of whom are on the meeting by Zoom. Staff members who helped inform it and make sure that we were accurate, and you know, it's all a bit of a crystal ball, but to let you know that we're on top of it, we're tracking it, and we will keep you guys posted as things unfold.
I mean,
Thank you.
great.
My fingers felt like molasses.
I know, I called her right after, I'm like.
I'm working on it. Okay, thank you. All right, CEO report. Brandon, will you advance the slides or someone? Thank you so much. Done all that, chair report's done, CEO report. This I'm going to turn over to Mark to use our time on a quick legislative roundup. And then I'll do a fuller CEO report at our board meeting in a couple weeks.
So congratulations to all who ran, and a lot of results are still to be determined. On this slide, just a couple slides here, the names in bold are those who were the incumbents, and I put up the percentage of votes as I was most recently able to ascertain. A few top line bits of information. Democrats appear to be able to continue to hold their 2/3 supermajority in both houses of the state legislature. In response to the national results, Governor Newsom has called a special session to convene on December 2nd. Details could follow, but that's the date on which new officials, new legislators take the oath of office. And so we're not quite clear what that will mean in the immediate present. As of last Friday at 4:58 p.m., California had 4.95 million votes remaining to be processed. At that time in Merced County, there were 48,754 ballots processed and about 38,000 remaining. But they indicated that the next report is not due until November 14th. So a gap between the 8th and the 14th for an update from Merced County, which includes Los Banos. In San Mateo County, as of 5 o'clock last night, November 11, there were 281,000 ballots processed, and the next with 51,900 remaining. And the next San Mateo County Registrar's report is due November 13th. And we just don't know what the distribution of the remaining votes might turn out to be. So information on this slide, still too close to call, I think, in Congressional District 13 between incumbent John Duarte and Adam Gray. The other numbers are pretty clear. I do believe that Evan Lowe has conceded to Sam Ricardo in Senate, in Congressional District 16. I believe that the state races, with the exception of 8027 in the Central Valley, are pretty much resolved with significant margins. And so we'll see where the 8027 goes in the next report coming up. And then there was a close race for Board of Supervisors District 4, but you can see the numbers there. And not sure a second has been entered yet in that race. And the state climate bond is clearly on its way to passage. Any questions? This slide. Next slide, please. And so in the local races, just an update as to where we are with board members. We have 5 board members who will be transitioning off at the end of this year. And that's part of the honorary event at our November board meeting. We had a number of board members in contested races. It is unlikely that Mr. Yanas, the mayor of Los Baños, is going to prevail. He's in 3rd place in that race, and it's not very close. I want to also mention regarding Los Baños that 2 of the council members appear to have been recalled. Very significant votes in support of the recall there. In the other 2 races, I would say they're within margin of C, given how many votes remain and not where those votes in Passaic County are coming from, but those were races that were separated by 10% or less, I believe, last time I looked. In Los Baños, the council protocol is that the mayor is the delegate to Peninsula Clean Energy. So
Party was losing his race.
he is, sorry.
Okay.
I had, so he's losing 44.97 to 55.03. But again, not knowing how many votes are outstanding.
Pretty big gift.
It's, but I haven't heard where there's been any decision. Again, without, there's clearly over 10% of the ballots, but what you don't know is whether they've counted the day of election ballots that came in from another, whether the remaining votes are even distributed around the county. There's no way to know. So I think anything 10% or less, it's hard to really be certain of at this point.
Jim Dugan was running unopposed.
I have a question. So PCE has been somewhat controversial over time on the Los Baños Council. And Paul totally came around to be a very strong supporter, where initially he was, I guess it would be generous to say, skeptical. Do you have any sense of what the new board's attitude is?
So good question. I'm planning to go down December 4th is the reorganization meeting in Los Baños, and we'll proceed at that time. And but there appear at this point to be at least 2 vacancies on the council. So they're
Because of the recall?
Because of the recall.
When they did a recall, they didn't, there weren't alternative candidates?
Correct.
Huh.
Correct.
Not at city level.
Wow,
they,
that's unusual.
yeah, they
Not at
were.
the city level.
Not at the city level, okay.
So there will be only 3 council members, and 2 of the races are fairly close. So it remains to be seen who the other 2 will be.
And do we have any
Sure.
sense of the mayor? The person who's
he owns
leading
a very significant restaurant, and he has been a mayor before in the city, so a well-known public figure.
And was he a mayor when they were part of PCE?
Predated that.
So we have some relationship building to do, which I think will be fine, and our plan is to go down there, let the dust settle, let everyone take their, seats in their positions, then we'll go down and have a meeting the same way that we did with Mariana's and city manager.
I don't think PCE was like.
We were not an issue
We were
in that
not, like,
election,
Sure.
which was good,
Well, they've gotten benefits.
no news
They've-
here.
Benefits.
Big benefit.
The John Dugan, he did
Yes.
not.
Two seats and two candidates.
Oh, vote for two seats, two candidates. So he, okay.
So
he
maybe
ran-
it's the wrong phrasing.
Yeah, so he was not in a competitive race.
So our plan here then is that for all of those that we know about, we will celebrate the departure at the November meeting. We had hoped to do December, but because of the timing of the transition, it'll be November. And I believe Jan Pepper, and some others will be joining, and so, we, just so you know, we moved the, closeout of the strategic plan. Cause that whole thing is gonna take a big chunk of time, and we have energy risk management, we have a bunch, so we pushed that out to next spring, so it also could be closer to the adoption of the new plan. So we took that off of the November agenda, so we could leave a little bit of room. Proper sentiment for folks. Okay. Right, is there anything else? Lauren?
No, that's it.
Other questions?
Yes, go back just maybe real quick. So we will be getting, like for Tulsa Valley, Jeff will be getting when will what's the process by which we reach out to those cities?
We started to work on that.
Okay.
And I'll fill you in.
Okay, great.
I've reached out.
Okay, great. And supervisors saying whoever's gonna take that.
But as you know, I mean, that's generally an appointment of the mayor,
It is.
and the mayor doesn't get appointed until the reorganization, so.
Cities like ours, we know who's gonna be there. Rotation smoothly, so
Yeah, if you have a rotation,
we have a. You can retake.
Unless I get, but that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, make sure it does.
All right.
We are, you and I can talk, but we're meeting.
Make sure that's in the minutes.
Oh, he wasn't.
Perfect, okay. I think our people did their, responsibilities with more due diligence. If anyone.
Do we need to take public?
Yes, let's take public comment. Does anyone have any comments on the CEO, the chair, or the CEO's or chair's reports? Okay, thank you. All right, we're moving on to our next item, which is the energy risk policy overview.
Great, I will lead, but I'm gonna hand it over in a second. First, like to introduce Kelly Lou Quintal to my right here. Kelly's gonna drive the conversation, the presentation. Kelly, we hired in April. April is her first day. She is our first risk manager here at Peninsula Clean Energy. She comes from Anaheim Public Utilities, was there for a couple of years, 3 years or so before here. But before that, she was, I think, 12 or so at SoCal Edison. So huge, over almost 20 years of risk management experience, a huge hire for us. Thrilled to have her on board. Just as by way of background, it's not that we weren't managing risk before. But the primary risk we have, which we're going to talk about today, is energy risk. And that the management of energy risk was largely took place in Roy's function in the energy procurement. And sort of best practice is to separate that, sort of, what's the metaphor, the fox minding the hen house or whatever. And so we decided to pull the risk management function out of energy procurement. It reports up to me. We hired Kelly as a first dedicated risk manager. She joined, as I said, in April. And since then, she has been mostly focused on putting together the energy risk policy, updating this. We think it's a huge improvement to what we currently have. Significant improvement on the governance side, structure, controls. We've worked extensively with Roy and his team to make sure it works within the confines of what they need to do, but obviously has the appropriate risk control. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly and lead the discussion.
Good morning.
Morning.
So kind of just to level set everybody, Nick just mentioned about risk. So kind of there's all these risks related to energy procurement and managing the energy portfolio that no one really talks about, but they're kind of all under the covers. And so I think the first main one that most people think about is market risk and, price volatility. And we've seen that, recently with RA and rec prices. And so I think that's, the one that most people are commonly trying to mitigate with the risks. And primarily those are driven by weather events. And then there's, other market events that could affect market prices like transmission outages or just market liquidity, supply versus demand. Another one that we're also trying to manage is counterparty risk. So we have a failure of potentially a counterparty not meeting their contractual obligations. They're not going to deliver or perform under their contract, meaning, they're not going to deliver the energy that we've signed up for, or they're not going to pay us. And so we're, hopefully trying to mitigate some of that risk. Also concentration risk. We also have a risk of, we sign too many contracts with one single developer or one counterparty, and if for some reason they go bankrupt or they have financial distress, we're potentially out that energy and out those payments that we would normally receive. Another one is operational risk. So there's some internal processes where if there's weaknesses, we may not be managing our contractual obligations correctly, whether or not there's over or under delivery of energy under the contracts, or not being able to manage payments under the contracts. So we're trying to help mitigate some of those risks. Another one is liquidity risk. So kind of along the lines of counterparty risk. If the counterparty is not going to pay, we have potential liquidity risk there where they may become a cash flow issue, or in some of the contracts, we require the counterparty to post collateral like cash or letter of credit to make sure they're going to perform under their contract. So if they don't post, then that's a potential sign of financial distress and may cause issues later down the line under those contracts. I think a big one right now too is regulatory risk. So if there's changes in how, we need to procure RA or RECs, that may change how we have to procure our portfolio, and that may ultimately also affect market prices. So that's something that we also have to consider. And then the last one is volumetric risk. We rely primarily on intermittent renewable resources. And so because of that intermittency, we have a potential of either over or under procurement of electricity because of those renewable resources. So putting together energy risk policy, looking at all these risks will help formulate a more formal structure in mitigating these risks and reporting them out. So we're helping manage those risks to make sure that we're procuring electricity at an efficient manner. Any questions on this slide? Okay, so just for background, the energy procurement function, as we just saw, inherently has a lot of risk. And so part of PCE's portfolio has gotten larger. We've procured more energy. There's been an increase in transactions. So as a result, all of those risks have also increased. So currently there's no formal structure of monitoring and reporting to mitigate those risks. So in putting together this energy risk policy, we're trying to put a more formal structure for monitoring and reporting to make sure that we're properly mitigating those risks. Currently, there are 2 existing policies. We have Policy 7, a risk management policy. It contains provisions around management of risk, but there's not a lot of details, and it hasn't been updated since 2020. And then we also have an existing Policy 15, Energy Supply Procurement Authority. That's where the authorizations to the board to approve transactions greater than 5 years resides in. And then there's also authorizations for the CEO to approve transactions with terms 5 years or less. Those are all through informal meetings with senior staff. So an energy risk policy will create a more structure and provide more details than the current 2 existing policies. And just to kind of put the board at ease, the energy risk policy, the board will continue to retain all of its existing authorities, so nothing will change from the board's authorizations. Any questions here? Yes.
So, thank you, Kevin. So on the second the two blue dots at the bottom, board is required to approve all transactions with terms greater than 5 years. Is that a twist on it, or has it always been like that?
It's always been like
And
that.
so I'm thinking we have time, but is there dollar amount too?
No, it's just time.
It's not any transaction, it's energy purchase.
Energy
purchase
purchase.
transaction. I totally understand that's energy purchase, but so even if it's a tiny little energy purchase transaction, if it's over 5 years. You have to approve it, but if it's a huge contract, but under 5 years, then the CEO is delegating. I'm
Yes.
just trying to
Yes.
We
understand.
don't have a
It's
little
all on
tiny
time.
5-year.
Like,
It's a very
Yeah.
good question.
I'm just asking, like.
No, but 2 years of RA could easily cost more than like those little inline generations, inline hydro generation projects, pretty small. Legacy.
So I guess what I'm saying is the functional approval process really time, or is it money?
For the board, it's
Time.
there is story in Kelly
Okay, we'll finish up.
continues, there's gonna be a risk oversight committee that is proposed and a full risk oversight committee
Yeah.
process. A lot of the detail is not in, to be honest with you, the public document, because a lot of it is proprietary.
Yes, no.
So- This is sort of us trying to give enough framing and make sure that we don't at all dilute the board's participation while creating additional structure and thresholds.
So when I guess, when I look at this, what I think to myself is, should it be time and money? Like, should it be both? Like a tiny little, what do you say, like a long hydro but small amount of money versus, I'm just asking, but.
If you want to answer that, Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah.
There's a reason.
Yeah, there's a reason. Yeah, because we have, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question, follow-up to that is, it says all transactions less than 5 years are delegated. Isn't there isn't that all transactions under $1 amount? I don't know.
No, not
So there could be
current.
In energy.
yeah, but
This is only energy.
so there could be a $100 million 4-year transaction that the board doesn't see.
Technically.
Okay. Yeah, no, I know.
Just call out. If he's, see his name. I think he's multitasking. So. I'll text him and make sure that he's fully present and can answer, but.
Okay,
We're
can
gonna
we-
address some of these.
Yeah, yeah,
things. Because we knew that question.
I'm just thinking like, in relation to my children, okay, like if they want to take a little loan out for a long time, I'm not, if they want to put a lot on my credit card, I don't know, so
Yeah.
it's just that notion of,
Yeah.
one time versus
Okay.
money.
And I'll do.
We'll obviously be discussing.
Yeah. The energy risk policy overview. So this document is to provide a more formal framework to provide parameters and limits to manage risk. It's going to streamline the process to execute transactions in a dynamic environment. The authorizations and limits were determined based on best benchmarking and best practices. So looking at other CCAs, IOUs, and POUs, also looking at historical transactions and our current regulatory and compliance requirements. The board will currently retain its authority to approve any transactions greater than 5 years and material contract amendments, so those will continue to go to the board. And the board will be provided updates on energy risk management activities at least every 2 years and any policy breaches under the energy risk policy on an annual basis. Any questions on this slide?
Actually, I have a question.
Yes.
So the last statement, any policy breaches are reported on an annual basis. I mean, I don't have any problem with that if it's a minor issue, but if it's a major issue, it needs to be reported much more quickly than on an annual basis.
It will be reported to the ROC, which we'll talk about in a second, which is the primary governance structure to manage. What we're doing here is we're creating a new committee that never existed before that's really best practice. And the ROC will manage all breaches. There's a formal process for reporting breaches, an explanation, a sort of a document you have to produce when there is a breach. And that will manage it. The ROC meets on a quarterly basis. The idea was on an annual basis, we'll take anything that the ROC saw presented to the board. I guess if it's very, very significant, it could come earlier, but the ROC is really managing the risk on a daily/quarterly basis.
And all of this is a floor, so you can always bring something.
Yeah.
Correct.
Both a contract and also if there's an issue.
We don't have any of this presently.
Yes.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I go back to the previous question first? Roy, I see you're on with us now. Hi, we had a previous question that I think I know the answer to, but I want you guys to weigh in. And that is, there's a question on the table about right now, the current threshold is a time threshold for when a energy contract would have to go to the board. And that's stated, there's no current dollar threshold, but is it not true that anything that's over that $250,000 annual threshold has to come to the board for approval? Energy contract or non-energy contract, correct?
I'm not sure if that threshold applies to energy purchases. Policy 15 currently doesn't have any dollar amount threshold in there.
Okay, and we are gonna get to that, but we need to be able to clearly, at the end of this presentation, say why. So just teeing that up for you and Kelly and, okay?
Yeah, there's currently not the limit I can say for the 250. I mean, we spent $400 million on energy procurement.
Right.
So that would be a lot of CEO approval on contract.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, your question's also gonna help us strengthen this for the full board presentation. So if there are things we need to go back and do, we can do that analysis. Okay.
The next slide is the governance structure. So under the energy risk policy, we're asking the board to delegate authority to this new risk oversight committee. So that is comprised of the CEO, CFO, COO, and Senior Director of Power Resources. And the General Counsel will also be invited as a non-voting member. So we'll have a more formal structure of the risk oversight. The ROC will establish detailed processes, parameters, limits, and authorizations. So that's going to be all in a separate document, kind of like Sean proposed earlier. That's all proprietary information. The ROC will meet at least on a quarterly basis to review and discuss and approve energy procurement activities and manage those energy risks. And they'll be reviewing reports to review the market outlook, net open positions, executed transactions, procurement targets versus actuals, counterparty exposures, and policy exceptions. And the establishment of the ROC is best-in-class risk management practice.
So this is really the big, I think, improvement in our process. It doesn't exist today. Not saying anything's totally broken today, but currently it's sort of an informal ad hoc discussion Sean will have with Roy, myself, Sean, me. Here we're putting together a formal process. There'll be reporting, governance. There's a lot of sort of more teeth on the, whatever metaphor you want to use. There's a 20 or so page document that the ROC will approve that has all limits and authorizations and strategies and reporting thresholds. And this is sort of the meat of where we think the improvement is.
Because essentially what it does is it takes it out of a conversation that right now Roy and I have on our weekly meetings. And it's a very structured conversation, don't get me wrong, but it basically diversifies and manages that risk. And I think also builds bench strength in a way across the organization and across senior leadership, so.
I think there are many of us here at the time when we first started, rolled this out, Rick and Jack, we remember this when we had a little bit of volatility in the market. And we were a little surprised at when we had to go into the 1 day spot market and fill gaps. and how expensive it was. And we had no hedges or anything on to sort of protect or collar our volatility. So it was a big surprise to all of us, and we began this informal process of hedging essentially, some of our open positions to limit risk. So this just, I think, is a secondary solution to be more transparent and formalize the process and procedures so that we can essentially protect the board and protect our organization. Any kind of criticism or challenge that we somehow weren't operating as justice. Thank you.
Any questions on this slide? The next slide, so just wanted to provide an overview of the existing policies and then what's going to change going to the energy risk policy. So currently, policy 7 only covers CAISO transactions. It doesn't cover anything else that we're currently transacting. So under the new energy risk policy, it will cover CAISO transactions plus all the other transactions that are currently being executed, like RA, environmental attributes, GHG. So it'll be a wide range of products that we're currently transacting. And there's also going to be a process in place that for some reason a new product develops in the market. Roy's team wants to start transacting under that. There's a process in place to get that approved by the ROC, where there's a lot of vetting and what that product is going to be used for. So we think by going to the energy risk policy, it's going to enhance what our current policy 7 is covering, and so it'll be a more comprehensive framework for transactions. Any questions on policy 7? Then the next one, policy 15, that's where current authorizations lie. So under the board of directors, wanted to note that currently there isn't going to be any change. So any contracts or transactions that are greater than 5 years will continue to go to the board. What's going to change is kind of everything underneath it. Right now, the CEO has authorizations to transact anything 5 years or less. And so that's kind of going to be reallocated to the ROC. So where there's going to be more oversight for the CEO, CFO, CEO, and senior director will be able to review those transactions. And then we're also providing authorizations to senior director of power resources and power resources managers for shorter term transactions, 2 years or less and 1 year or less. That's primarily because some of the transactions we do, such as RA or some energy transactions, there's a short fuse to transact. And so we want to provide power resources the ability to turn around those transactions quickly so that the market doesn't move against us. So those will all be delegated down to those staff levels.
With reporting requirements.
Yes. Yes, there's all reporting requirements under all of these scenarios. Any questions on this slide? Oh, sure.
CEO feel about.
It's funny because when I first read it, first got the presentation, I said, well, basically.
Yes.
All of my authorizing power, or a lot of it, got diluted significantly. And so, yes, I noticed. And I do feel that this is, if you just take the person out of it or the position out of it, this is the best thing for the agency. It builds capacity, it spreads the risk. It means that you don't have basically 2 people, you know, kind of making all of the very large decisions along with the board, but it just, so it's the right thing to do. But thank you, I think that's.
Thank you, Director.
Sure.
Yes, Director.
So in that anything less than 5 years doesn't go to the board. And dovetailing off what Director Alf said about RA and potential 2-year contract, it could be a big contract.
Yeah.
Where it says the ROC will establish detailed processes and parameters. Would that in fact include that the ROC could in fact say, this is a 2-year, less than 2-year contract, but it has some extra risk we didn't anticipate, and choose to bring it to the board anyway? Does it preclude someone from the ROC or the CEO from doing that?
No, no, I think the Rock always has the option that says if they reviewed it and they think that there's too much risk or that they want the board to also review the transaction, they always have the option to delegate up to the board to review and approve the transaction.
Perfect. Thank you.
I do think that the issue that we discussed previously needs to be considered, which is if there's some dollar amount less than 5 years, which is so great that it should come to the board.
Yeah.
And I think that would be protective of the organization and the board.
Yes.
We'll go back and.
Do you have a
Take a look.
idea on that or thought? Five?
Not really, I'd like their suggestion.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Galileo.
And then in addition to policy 15, currently the board doesn't see any contract amendments. And so with the energy risk policy, we're gonna enhance that a little bit more where any material changes to contracts will be presented to the board for approval. So whether that's a price change, a volume change, or some kind of structural change to the transaction, will come back to the board for their approval. So that's a benefit going to the new energy risk policy.
Is that for any amendment to any contract or just which contract amendments? I mean, if it's a short-term contract, like a 6-month RA contract, wouldn't you have to come back to the board?
Correct.
What is the cutoff though? What's the? Is it cut off like 5-year
For the
contract?
5 years.
Yeah.
So if it's a 5-year.
Yes.
And material changes too.
Which we go on to describe.
Material changes to a 5-year contract, but not to a 3-year contract.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you. Okay, so over to the ROC authorizations. Kind of went over this earlier, but the board currently maintains their authorization to approve transactions greater than 5 years. But they are also going to delegate to the ROC authority to approve transactions that are 5 years or less. So that list of products in the product type table, that's currently all the product types that are currently being transacted. So electricity, RA, environmental attributes, which are the RECs, and then any other approved products, which we currently don't have right now, but anything that may be approved by the ROC in the future. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there anyone have any questions? So to Director DeGolia's point, on the short side, the larger transaction amount, I'm also wondering if on the flip side, on the lengthier term contracts over 5 years, is there a under that dollar amount that you would just like authority to be able to do, or do you feel like you need to bring all of that back?
I think right now, we're happy to take everything over 5 years back to the board. Mostly, if it's more than 5 years, it's probably gonna be a decent dollar amount. I can't think of an example where it would be immaterial amount, so.
Okay.
And what comes back to the board for those 5 years and above are any kind of material changes to the
Okay.
terms.
Got it.
So if it's not material, and we've got some definitions for that, then it generally.
Good, I just want to ask. Yes, Director.
Can you explain the difference between term in years and maturity years?
Sure. So the term is when the actual deliveries will occur. So for like a RA product, the term, if it's from delivery for January to 2025 to December 2026, that's a 2-year term. Maturity is including from the date we execute to the end of the delivery term. So say for that 2025, 2026 RA deal we executed as of today, the maturity would be 2 years and 2 months. So the maturity takes into account the time before deliveries occur from when we sign. And usually, yeah, there's a little bit of lead time from when we sign to when the deliveries actually occur.
Okay, thanks.
So the CEO has authorization to execute minor contract amendments. So we'll have defined what those minor amendments are. Those are usually administrative, arising from counterparties effectuating their obligations related to projects in their normal course of business, and usually don't have a material effect of the terms of the agreement. So usually it's related to project financing, consent to collateral assignments, changes to forms, notice provisions, insurance obligations. So usually issues like that will have the CEO authorize those contract amendments. Any questions here? ROC will delegate authority to the CEO and Senior Director of Power Resources to transact for terms 2 years or less. And it's the same product types that we've seen for the ROC. So as I mentioned previously, because some of these transactions have a short fuse and they're market sensitive, we want the ability to be able to transact on very quickly. And so that's why we've delegated authority to the CEO and Senior Director of Power Resources to execute transactions with terms 2 years or less.
Director Medina, to your earlier question, this is where we really have questions, right? Because these contracts come quickly and the ROC is scheduled to meet quarterly at this point. And so it's good to add layers of process and protection, but not to the extent where it would jeopardize our ability to function. So this is a little bit of that compromise here.
Thank you.
Roy has a comment.
Yeah,
Yes.
can I say something? Yeah. So the design of the ROC is that the ROC will be approving certain parameters, limits, and constraints before we start executing for the next quarter. So my team will be exercise a discretion within that limit that's pre-approved by ROC. So we'll be taking a forward strategy sheet on all these products to the ROC before the quarter starts or before the year starts on a quarter plan, an annual plan. And then it will include volume pricing that's pre-approved by the ROC. And then we will transact within that circle of authority that's pre-approved by ROC. So so there is control there. Kelly, if I captured that wrong, please correct me, but that's my understanding. There will be a pre-approval before we even get into approving these transactions on this page.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Any other questions here? The next one, authorized trader authorization. So it's similar to the previous slide. We're giving some staff authority to execute transactions with terms 1 year or less. And as Roy said earlier, we'll be reviewing the ROC will be reviewing all of these proposed transactions and approving them prior to them being executed. But this gives them the opportunity to be able to execute those transactions quickly, so we can stay within market prices. Any questions here? So under our procedures, we're gonna establish all of these procedures. We'll be consulting with legal. We'll have a list of approved transaction platforms, contract forms, delivery points, and product types that Power Resources can transact under. We'll also have a procurement plan. That's gonna be a 5-year outlook that the ROC will be reviewing. And a forward strategy sheet, which is on a quarterly basis. We'll be looking at our position, and the ROC will be approving all of the potential transactions, both purchases and sales for that upcoming quarter. It'll include volumes and prices, so Power Resources will have a range of which they can transact under as long as the ROC approves that. And that gives us a better view of what the current market conditions and outlook looks like. What I've seen in the past, and I think we've all seen, is that RA and REC prices have been volatile over the last couple of years. And so it's hard to predict what that current market price is going to look like a quarter out. And so we think by having the ROC approve a price range instead of having formal limits in the policy, will give a better purview of what the market conditions look like, and it'll make sense. Because I've been in positions where we have a dollar limit and it doesn't really reflect current market prices, and so we're always asking for a breach of those limits because the limits are outdated and don't reflect current market prices. So we think this is a better plan of going forward so that it, really looks at what the current market conditions look like. And then we'll also be looking at reporting. So we'll be looking at procurement and concentration limits, approved traders and transaction limits. We'll be reporting counterparty credit collateral and other various metrics to help manage those risks. Any questions here? So the next step is we'll be reviewing the energy risk policy with the board next week, I think. And then hopefully we'll have our first risk oversight committee in January. We'll formalize the procedures and we'll come back to the board sometime in 2025 for approval of an enterprise risk management policy.
Enterprise meeting across the
That's sort of, we wanted to get the energy risk policy in place. That's our probably 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6 risk. But beyond that, we realized there are other risks, operational, regulatory, financial, not related to procurement of electricity, that Kelly's next on the list.
Yes.
So we'll come back to this committee with that.
Question, yeah, please.
One thing I'd like to ask is when the ROC meets to consider which of the decisions that it's making, which are pretty important decisions, authorized traders, a whole series of different things, which, if any of those would make good sense to report to the board. Because it's clear that everything the ROC's deciding needn't be reported to the board, but you guys can assess what you think would be best to report to the board. And I think you should share that with the executive committee after you've made those suggestions.
Is that the very end?
Yep.
Yes, this is the end.
And you remind me again, who will sit on what?
The ROC is the CEO, CFO, CEO, and Senior Director of Power Resources. And then General Counsel will be a non-voting member.
General counsel ex officio, essentially. Okay, which brings me to another question, which is, we are getting more and more complicated. We have more requirements for legal. Sean, you and I kind of talked about this a little bit, which is, does there come a point in time at which, we need in-house legal
counsel? It's not on the agenda.
I understand. That's. And I mean, I think that's within the purview of putting legal counsel on this. You're saying, obviously, you need that. If we're gonna have enterprise risk looked at throughout the whole organization, legal risk is always a piece, the biggest piece of risk. And that can include everything from, we are all driving down to a ribbon cutting and we get hit by a car and killed or something tragic and horrible, but like liability risk and, all that other kind of risk that goes on. So, I just know that when we're looking at risk as a city, having legal assessment with regard to that and advice is really imperative and important. And I'm just want to make sure we have the resources we need and the availability we need to manage that.
Please borrow that, and those are on the agenda, but what's the joint arrangement and resource allocation for using the county council?
So we have been using county council services since the beginning of PCE's launch. We have David Silberman is our stated general counsel. He works with Jen Stalzer, who's with us today, I believe, and who does, I would really say, sort of the lion's share of the work presently. And then we have a small percentage of a junior counsel's time. That's really in the general counsel, municipal council, public domain. We also have a variety of other engagements with legal counsel for commercial legal counsel, regulatory.
The work we did over here with the bond offering.
Correct.
Council.
So what's going on now is that COO Shalini Swaru is an attorney herself. And so this is one of the things she's been looking at internally around where do we have gaps? Where do we perhaps have risk? And that would be part of this next phase of the enterprise risk and a decision to make whether or not to bring in our own general counsel. Present, working with the county has worked very well for us. So we don't envision necessarily a future where we would, you know, completely abolish that relationship. We just might shift it a bit and, you know, their scope of work might change. But that's not, it's very premature at this point. It's on the list for 2020.
What about cost structure?
Very economic.
Yeah, with the county. Yeah. So, you know, it's a question around enterprise risk, where are the gaps and what's the best way to proceed to fill those gaps? PBD, we'll be getting back to you.
Dr. Medina.
I want to thank everybody involved in having this discussion. My question is, of the other CCAs out there, is this a very common practice? Are we following the guideline of the CCAs out there? How many of them have a rock?
Yeah,
And how many of them have something that we could look at? To be able to be more familiar with it?
yeah, well, yeah, as part of putting together the energy risk policy, we did reach out to the other CCAs and they all have some similar structure of the risk oversight committee. The members of it vary. Some of them have, you know, 2 or 3 members. Some of them have, I think, some outside, but they all have this risk structure where there's, you know, top senior staff that's part of it. And then when we looked at the authorizations with the terms, we're in line with the other CCA, so we're all in the ballpark with our meeting or managing the risk compared to the other CCAs.
That's also great to hear, so thank you all.
But that's a good point, and Sean makes a good point, which is maybe to put a little slide in the
Yeah.
presentation, just sort of benchmarking us off of the other organizations, maybe a few highlights of what some of the others do and how we look compared to that.
I think we should also, just to be responsive to the questions, directly answer the question or say more about the dollar threshold question. And why or why not. I'd like to bring Roy into that discussion, so we'll talk about that in back view. I think we could probably go back in the files and do some quick analysis on the number of contracts under 5 years, maybe between 2 years and 5 years that have been signed by the CEO. In just from my experience in 18 months, there haven't been many.
Yeah.
That's a lot of art. I do mostly art. So just a little bit of that history. Yes, Roy?
Yeah, can I, if I may, you know, this is speaking on a policy that will eventually govern me, my team, and how we operate. So I want to be super objective here on what I say. Let me first speak on the history or the current practice of how we handle approvals for contracts less than 5 years. If it's 1 year below, you know, it's just between me and Sean, we present the item to the supply team meeting. Sometimes I present to Sean, the staff present to Sean, and then we make that decision. But anything that's more than a year, currently we seek approval from board chair and general counsel before we approve. I believe there's one that went through that approval process last week on a carbon-free transaction. And then on deals that are more major in nature, that's 5 year below, we sometimes bring that to the procurement subcommittee, and that's a tool we sometimes use to seek approval and engage the board. And Sean, on transactions that we entered into, that's 5 year below, we have a quarterly report that we put together and share with the board. It's called the quarterly procurement report. Next one will be in November. I just approved that in Granicus, so it will be in in the November board packet. It lists all the transactions that we have done and that didn't go through board. It's 5-year less that was transacted in the prior 3 months. So those are the current ways of how we track the transactions and keep the board informed of the transactions that we made. Just want to provide that context. And
We
then-
thank you, Roy, and we do intend to maintain the procurement subcommittee.
Yes.
We have some members going off, most unfortunately, and so there'll be some new membership, but we do intend to keep that group together.
Yeah, that's
Is
correct.
that, on that procurement subcommittee, is that a place where former board members who raise their hand to say, we'd like, we have that policy? Or do
Yeah,
we
we
change
can
that out? We
Yeah.
changed it. Okay, we changed
We
it.
still have 2 former board members who have expertise in the field.
Right,
And that's really the key there.
okay,
It's having some expertise.
right.
And also to provide context on the dollar amount, and so the highest dollar amount contract, to our knowledge, we just did a quick research while we were talking about this topic, and the highest amount contract that we executed without coming to board was a 5-year RA contract that was in a dollar amount of $44 million. Still pretty high volume of high dollar amount, but not anything close to a long-term PPA contract that would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So if we're not we're open to having a threshold, dollar threshold to come back to the board. We just have to come up with the right amount.
Yeah, because again, I don't want anything that interrupts our ability to transact. So that this is always the balance.
Yeah, it's primarily a timing consideration, like Kelly mentioned. For hedge RFOs, it's usually closed in the morning. We have to transact by noon, so there's no time for approval seeking. But for 1 year or shorter term RA contracts, it's every day the price changes. So we can't wait that long. But for a longer term RA contract, but less than 5 years, there's probably time to seek approval, and so we have to establish that threshold appropriately to accommodate timing.
And I want to make sure that I don't know that we're necessarily asking for are we asking for them to set a price approval that you want the board to come back, or we're just exploring it or explaining it, right? Okay, yeah. Yes, Betsy.
This is what would be interesting to see what other CCAs would do.
Yes, yeah, it'd be an interesting thing to see other CCAs doing. And I think that sort of, well, for me, the mandating policy is that whatever we put in place cannot obstruct your ability to do business in a expeditious way, right? Because then that's risk. The risk that you can't get the board together, the risk you can't get a quorum, and all the machinations that go around notification for a public meeting are immense, right? So I think an alternative to that would be notification to the board at a subsequent meeting, after a certain level, just so we're informed, not that we have to make an approval, but just so the board is aware of what's going on. That may be the more facile way to manage it. I think frankly, our board is moving to, probably we started with so many people who had such a high level of expertise that was sort of one thing. As we move into a more management oriented board with more general expertise and less specific expertise, I think it makes more sense to move to a more broad-based general operations. That's a traditional board role.
I think the other way to frame this, and maybe I'll join you in opening remarks for the board meeting, is that this is somewhat similar to a couple months ago when we went through all the different steps to bring policies 14 and 16 to codify those that happened to be the board and committee operations, just trying to kind of codify not only current practice, but raise the bar. on our practices, this is a similar type. What we're doing here is similar to that.
Definitely.
And just, wanting to formalize a lot of what we already do, but then improve upon. Just an analogy for that. Okay.
Great. I would like to open this up to members of the public who might have any comments. Nothing, okay, great. Fantastic, we'll go ahead and close public comment. And do you have?
I think we had, I forget the official policy or steps, Sean, but I think we're asking this committee to recommend.
Yes.
And we will add to the presentation a benchmarking page, we'll put in more detail on the dollar threshold, maybe in some of we'll consider the idea of reporting up to the board. Post transaction, which I think is already currently, as Roy was saying, quarterly, and that will continue, so I think that's already, maybe we'll just make that clear.
Does anyone want to make a motion to recommend this? Okay, we have a motion to second without. I'd like to ask who would like to approve this? Say yes. Yes. Any no's? Okay, motion carries unanimously. All right, then we are supposed to wrap it up there. The last item on our agenda is committee member reports. Does anyone have anything they want to report out? I don't think. No one else? Anyone? Yes.
I don't know if this is appropriate, but I would love to just have a quick review of what we were talking about in the last meeting as part of the strategic plan. And so it may be something that should be done offline, but I just wanted to, when we were talking about prioritize greenhouse gas reduction, balanced priorities, or most affordable. If we're talking about most affordable, are we giving up on some of our cleanness? And are we talking about not, really reducing the amount of carbon-free energy?
So it may help to know that, so we, staff and the facilitator was here, took copious notes. There was not a loud cry to push to, that was option C, which was to sort of put affordability above all else, just to be blunt. There's some, some thoughts and agreement around that, but it didn't seem like a very strong direction. So where we are going right now is to think about how we enhance that middle ground, which puts affordability close to the top, right? So it is probably more about how we do it now as opposed to all of the environmental attributes at any cost. It's kind of where we had been in the past. And then there's some discussion ongoing with former Chair DeGolia around carbon-free and renewables and the balance of that and how we should be thinking about that. And so we've actually called together a procurement subcommittee meeting to dive more into that, to understand what that means. And then the plan would be to come back to the board in January for that discussion and then to complete the options discussion. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but
Well, I guess if we are in fact discussing moving away from carbon-free, like 100% carbon-free, I think that needs to be a very, very specific discussion.
you mean 100% renewable?
No, carbon-free.
No, she means
Okay, that's-
moving away from that toward affordability.
Right.
But I think B, the
But
right
I
way to think about B, it's an issue of balance. So we've got to figure out what the right balance is between affordability and carbon free. But it's definitely a balance. They're both in there.
I mean, clean energy is we put away from that. I think that needs to be a very deliberate discussion.
100% agree.
Okay.
100% carbon free on an annual basis.
But the bottom, as far as I'm concerned, the floor is that we are 100% carbon.
Or we have a floor.
Again,
But-
well, we're
Well,
already there.
But you gotta understand, that only works because we're stripping the recs from power and putting them onto system power to clean that power. Because the only available power between midnight and
Right.
8 AM is system power.
Yeah.
So here, so noted. For sure. And the procurement subcommittee is gonna dive into some of the technical discussion around that. To further inform the thinking that we have that's ongoing right now. So that we can come back to the board in January with some more refined thinking around this. I want to assuage your fear that we are going to go so far over to that option C. That we put affordability above all else. So I don't see that happening unless the board decides to reopen that discussion. Jake,
We decided against that.
we did. It wasn't an action item, so I want to be careful on my.
And it was great, it was a lot of discussion and not specific discussion when I went home, it was just like. Where exactly do we think?
And as you recall, the meeting was a conversation, there was no direction except policy, so I think they took direction, back to us in January.
Yep.
With,
Wonderful. Where did we land?
Kelly, I want to welcome you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming today, it's a pleasure to meet you. And we look forward to having your page at ICE. It's welcome. Okay, if there's no else, nothing. I'd love to, oh, yes, Jen, would like to make a comment. Yes, Jen, please.
I think you took care of it. I just wanted to make sure that we can agendize a discussion of the strategic plan. I just didn't want us to go too far afield.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And appreciate it. Good night. Bye, Rick. Take care.
Bye, Rick, have a good
Okay.
day.
Yeah, we can. Thank you. All right.